Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for attending this informational webinar today on how to prevent identity attacks and credential abuse. My name is Brad Taylor, and I'm the CEO of Proficio. Proficio is a managed detection and response company with global security operations centers located in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific. The information we're going to share today is based on our experience as a global managed detection and response company, as well as information we've gathered from some of our partners and friends at other security organizations and some analyst firms. Hopefully this will be informative for you. And if you have any questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end of this webinar. Again, thank you very much for attending. I'm going to go on off of video now, but I'll keep on the conference as we communicate. So the agenda is why identity-based attacks are a top cybersecurity threat, and more accurately, how do we identify these particular threats? And also we'll talk about the importance of automated response techniques and orchestration. What we find in this environment today is our perimeter of the network has changed. Probably 90% of the people on this webinar today are not in their office. They're remote someplace, most likely at home. And that's the new dynamic of the world we live in. People are going back to the office, but it's a slow environment. The attackers have also changed their techniques and tactics and are targeting identities as a perimeter of the network these days. So let's go and get started with really, what has changed. Again, people are remote, and as people are remote, attackers are changing the way that they're attacking. The Microsoft Vice President of Security recently said that compromised credentials were at the heart of the recent SolarWinds breach and are also the root cause of most ransomware attacks, making identity the new battleground in cybersecurity. We're seeing the same thing in our security operations centers. We're seeing a massive increase in identity attacks and credential abuse. We're also seeing that attackers are focused on targeted attacks instead of just the automated attacks. They're going after certain types of companies with sophisticated ways that they're attacking. They also don't just do drive-by ransomware attacks. They're actually creating staged ransomware attacks where they get access to an organization through credential abuse. They then propagate throughout the organization, look to find backups in certain locations. They'll put points of presence in your organization in different networks and zones before they launch the ransomware attacks, making it very, very effective. So again, the way in is through identities and credential abuse. Looking at the progression of cybercrime and cybercrime services, what we've found over the last couple of years is criminals are advanced in the way that they're providing services to other criminals. It's become a business. An example of that business is stolen passwords. So for about $150 today on the black market, I can buy 400 million username and password pairs that have been compromised and are now for sale. Most of these have been on social media accounts, but what we're finding is that users, we'll talk about this a little bit more, users are using the same password for multiple accounts. They might use passwords for their golf site, for Instagram, for Facebook, for something else. And then they'll use that same password on their corporate accounts. A lot of times for the username, they're also using their corporate email address. So there's a lot of risky behavior that we're seeing in companies and organizations and their users for passwords. We've almost forced companies and people to do this type of risky behavior because we've made it impossible to remember a password. If you've got to have a password that's 9 to 11 characters, it's got to be alphanumeric, and it's got to include a special character, and it's got to be, some upper level and lower level characters. It's nearly impossible to remember. So I'm going to come up with something that is unique to me, but I'm going to use that same password over and over again. And we're seeing a lot of people are using these same passwords. They're sharing passwords among groups. They're easy to guess based on a little bit of information about you. And what we're also seeing is they're using common ways to remember the password. Something like season, like this would be, for instance, spring 2022, exclamation point. So it's something that, will change every 90 days, but they know exactly what the password is in any 90-day term. We're seeing attackers using attacks like password spraying attempts. Instead of going to one account and using thousands of different password attempts, which we can defeat because we'll just block that user account, what we're saying is an attacker will go to 100 different user accounts and use the same 2 common passwords, and they'll have about a 2 to 3% success rate. So they're using a lot of different techniques along those lines. We'll talk about a few more in a few use cases. A little bit more data though, just based on our information and some surveys that we've seen from some of our security partners, it's interesting to note that the percentage of respondents to a recent survey of about 1,000 corporate users that said, hey, are you using the same password for different accounts, was over half. Among those that are using the same password accounts, they're using them across, anywhere from 3 to 7 different accounts. So we're not just reusing them once, we're reusing them over and over again. If you're using something like LastPass in your organization, LastPass will tell you when you're reusing passwords. Most people that we see are reusing passwords over and over again for the same and different accounts. Of the respondents that also admitted that they're using personal passwords at work, so I'm using it for a personal account and work, is about 44% of the time. That's a lot. We also see that senior level executives, about 1/3 of the time, are in the same bucket where they're reusing passwords in different accounts and using them on personal accounts and at work. So the attackers know this, and they're creating this as a new spectrum for where they're going after credential abuse to get access into organizations. We saw in 2021, which was last year, as well as a report from CrowdStrike, that there was a massive increase in the number and type of different identity threat attacks, as well as credential abuse. Attackers have already begun to escalate the attacks that they have on enterprises, and enterprises have not responded effectively in our ability to detect these attacks and to respond quickly. We saw that 45% increase in hands-on intrusion style attacking, which is non-malware related. Basically, I'm using attacks to go after credentials and vulnerabilities without installing malware. And we saw almost a 300% increase in credential access style abuse. So it's happening right now, it's continuing to escalate, and this is the new frontier. Another thing that makes this even more important to organizations is an identity compromise in the corporate environment today is exponentially more dangerous than it was in years past, because many companies have moved to a single sign-on based identity and access management platform like Azure Active Directory or Okta, where I actually can compromise your Microsoft 365 account access and password, and then get access to a multitude of different SaaS and corporate applications that are all authenticated through Azure Active Directory or Okta or other identity and access management platforms. So this increases the risk of an organization if we're just using something as simple as a password and don't have the ability to quickly detect that compromise and effectively respond in a very rapid time. So what have we seen as some of the recommendations for companies to actually help prevent compromise attacks for identities? The biggest one that we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years, and it's actually been around for 20 years, is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is really using multiple factors to validate a user's identity. It's typically known as something you know, a password, and something you have. That something you have can be a biometric, like a face scan that we see on our iPhones quite often. It can also be something like a phone, and you have an application that sends you a authorization request, and you push the button to approve. That's probably the most popular in use today for multi-factor authentication because it's a platform that's easy for the users to utilize without inputting another text message or another set of characters in a screen someplace. You put your password in, the application sends you a request on your iPhone to say, do you approve? And you hit the approve. Multi-factor authentication is not without its challenges and its issues. So multi-factor authentication can be defeated. Also, multi-factor authentication can't be used everywhere. Some legacy applications don't support it. There's also a cost associated with it, and the user experience is different. But we are seeing a large number of companies that are migrating, and we do recommend, highly recommend, moving to multi-factor authentication. What we've seen is a Google research study found that multi-factor authentication using an SMS code where you send a code and somebody inputs it helped to block 100% of automated attempts to break into your credentials. That's great. But what it also found, what the hackers can gain access with targeted attacks about 25% of the time. So multi-factor authentication with SMS, the Google research study found was only about 75% effective. So we still have about 25% where targeted attacks are effective at breaching multi-factor authentication. We also found at looking at different reports, especially again, the Google research report, that the on-device prompts where you push the button, it was about 100% effective in defeating automated bots, but was only about 90% effective with targeted attacks, which means that 10% of the time, attackers were able to defeat the push button style multi-factor authentication. So if you think about it, what happens is users have things like fatigue of getting this push button all the time. And a lot of times they think, okay, I authenticated, I wanted to keep that session open, the session may have stopped, and so my application is just sending you push the button again, so you say approve, and so you might see 2 or 3 of those and you just say approve, approve. Well, it's not your application that's sending that to you because it stopped. It's another attacker that's attempting to use your password at another location to get access to either the application you're in or a different application. If you hit approve, you're allowing that attacker into the organization. That's what happens about 10% of these attacks with the push button style. So let's look at how an example of how credential attack happens. How do these attackers actually get our passwords, and how are they using those? So a quick example is a bad actor compromises a golf scheduling website. The user actually gets a notification on their web page that, hey, you're compromised in your golf scheduling website, but they typically don't do anything about it, or they wait until 2 or 3 weeks later when they're going to golf and maybe they think about it. But in the meantime, the bad actor that's compromised this golf scheduling website will mine the database of usernames and passwords. They'll run a decryption program against that database. They'll be able to decrypt those over a few days. And all of a sudden, they've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of username and password pairs. They then kind of look through that. So they're kind of searching for corporate names and corporate entities as part of the username. So they might find some credentials of interest, something like T Brady at proficio.com and a password pound TB12 the GOAT. So if I know the username's T Brady at Proficio, I can bet that I can use T Brady at Proficio as a username for an Office 365 or Microsoft access and use that same password, TB12 the GOAT, and get access to that particular account. So attacker will log in to Microsoft 365, formerly known as Office 365, with that username password pair, and I'm in. That's how these attacks often work. And if I can buy 400 million password pairs and usernames for $150, that's a big database to search through. So now that we've talked about, the increase in identity threat attacks, the way that attackers are actually starting to gain username password pairs and utilize those, a recommended approach of protecting is multi-factor authentication, but it's not perfect. What we're seeing is analysts are also recognizing that there's a big need in the market. Gartner recently put out a report for the top trends in 2022, and they outlined 3 top trends. And one of those was that there is a new category of trend and requirement in the industry called identity threat detection and response. And they recommend that organizations should deploy in 2022 some form of identity threat detection and response solution. They classify this as a collection of tools and best practices to successfully defend identity systems from the endemic levels of attacks. We're seeing this today. So why is ITDR important? We're seeing it, as we mentioned, as the new perimeter. It's no longer just trying to gain access to your VPN, gain access through your firewall. The attackers are targeting identities. Identities are the top target that we're seeing today, and it's a massive increase in that environment. And identity is often even the key element to attacks now for like ransomware or supply chain attacks. So what do we recommend? There's a lot of recommendations that we would provide, but the best recommendation is to try and use some of the tools that you already have in place and just add to those. So the recommendations that we start off with for identity threat detection and response solutions are to use your existing security solution telemetry for data collection. Most organizations are already collecting data for Microsoft 365, for Active Directory, for authentication, things like Okta, any of your identity and access management systems. You're collecting that data and that log information today. You have endpoint protection platforms and EDR platforms that are collecting a lot of telemetry at the endpoint. You have firewalls that are collecting a lot of telemetry for who's coming in and out of your network. The same with VPN. So you have a lot of telemetry that you're already collecting and a lot of logs that you're collecting. Most often, organizations are using security information event management systems and beginning to use machine learning models and systems to detect threats. What we recommend is starting to increase the number of user and entity-based analytics to detect these suspicious activities. So if you haven't already started to do that, we recommend enhancing your library of use cases for this threat detection. We also recommend that you employ things like policy-based correlation rules and business modeling correlation rules. So what that means is you want to look at certain executives that have access to things like financial servers or privileged users and make sure that they have a higher degree of detection and then maybe an automated suspension of account if they're detected. You also want to have policies that if people are high-level executive and they go outside of a certain geolocation, that they need to notify the security team so that you can make sure that you're not going to automatically suspend their accounts. What we've also found as we've deployed these new machine learning models, these new use cases for user identities, is the first pass of them, you're going to have a lot of false positives. There's going to be a very high rate of false detections, and that's going to be probably the largest problem you need to deal with. So in order to deal with that problem, it's going to require looking at the data, tuning the use cases, tuning the machine learning models, and then creating a couple of different categories. Some of those would be, ones with high fidelity. I want to automatically try and suspend user accounts. Others, I may want to do some type of a double validation or some type of a review before suspending the account and taking action. In all cases, you want to have a combination of both automated and double action review by either some correlation double validation or a human review. Humans are always going to be required to do some level of authentication in this process when you determine there's a suspicious behavior. It's really going to require 24/7 automation and human analysis at a higher level because attackers are attacking 24/7. People are gaining access into our networks 24/7. The other thing that's really critical in a recommendation is fast detection and rapid containment is required to minimize the risk. Targeted attackers that get access to identity data are going to be looking to launch ransomware attacks, steal data, or even disrupt the network and disrupt other things. And what we've also seen is, try to kick off things like a funds transfer. In addition to looking at, this rapid detection, we highly recommend integrating some level of automated response utilizing your existing identity and access management platforms. So if you have the ability to authenticate at a single location, you also have the ability to suspend user accounts at a single location. And automating this is going to be one of the only ways to be as fast as you need to reduce the risk. The other recommendation that we have, and we'll go into some more of these, is in addition to utilizing your existing data through existing SIMs and machine learning models, increasing that indicators so that you can automatically, perform some type of response, is you need to look at the outliers. And the outliers are often reviewed, again, with human analysis in dashboards, reports, and other things that are outside of these use case models. And then you need to look at multiple types of escalation and response containment actions. So go over a few of those, other than just making the recommendations, and give you some examples. Some additional tips that we often recommend also are, when you create these large number of use cases, look for things like baselines. So in other words, if I look at a baseline, an example would be that I see somebody coming in, from a certain location, and that location might be, within a 50-mile radius of Los Angeles. And then if I see somebody coming in outside of that environment, I know that that's not in their home geolocation. And so once I baseline the user's, typical geolocation, I see somebody outside of that, that's an indicator of potential compromise. I might also look at use cases like an impossible travel scenario. An impossible travel scenario would be that same person in Los Angeles authenticates, and an hour later, I see the same authentication at that user account in New York. Impossible travel in today's environment. So that would be an indicator of a high fidelity use case that says, yes, somebody's compromised that account. We also want to look at use cases that'll use your threat intelligence platforms. If I have a known list of bad actors, I see a bad actor authenticate in, that's a very, very high likelihood of a compromise. We want to start to look at cross-device correlation and machine learning models as well, and then make sure that we integrate with our systems to be able to suspend the account. Some examples of this, double validation capability would be if I see a suspicious authentication followed by, an internal horizontal sweep, or Tor usage within the enterprise, or some type of suspicious file delete or file lookup in SharePoint. So again, start to look at things that are suspicious indicators of a compromise, and then suspicious indicators of an activity, tie those together and suspend the account. So those are some of the things that we've done, that we've seen, that are pretty successful. I can't emphasize enough, though, that response and automating your response process and orchestrating that response process is going to be very, very important to reducing your risk. It's critical to get rapid containment of these high fidelity threats in your environment. Again, if you see a logon from a bad actor in your threat intelligence platform, you need to suspend that account. There shouldn't be a lot of questions and reviews and change management boards. You just take the action. The other thing that we've seen that's very effective is these cloud access security brokers like MCAS. If you can look at some of the MCAS alerts, we find those to be very high fidelity in some environments as well. And then you might want to also then tie that together with, a C-suite type of an identifier, using some business context modeling or double validation to get the high fidelity threat detections. In some other areas, you might look for semi-automated containment. So in other words, I may not want to suspend, some organizations, executives and other people's accounts. I may want to have some type of review. But if I have a review, I still need that automated process where that security team, after they review and validate, can actually do something like push a button, in my case management system, and that automatically orchestrates through integration the ability to suspend or lock that account. So you need flexible actions by your response team in order to be effective in this environment. So moving on, here are a few examples that we've seen that have been highly effective, that we've utilized for automated response and for push button response. Again, when you get automated response, you're going to have to look at high fidelity use cases, test them, try them, tune them, combine them. And then once you get a good solid understanding of these are going to trigger, and almost always be a bad actor or a compromise, then you want to automate that account suspension. But like I said, in other cases, you want to have the ability to detect quickly, review quickly, and then quickly be able to push that button. So on the automated side, things like, again, impossible travel scenario is a very good indicator. If you see something like an account spraying attack followed by a successful logon, that most often will be, a bad actor that has guessed the password on the single first attempt and is an unauthorized authenticated user in your environment. So these are critical areas where you want to just automatically block. In some other areas, you might just see brute force attacks followed by a successful logon. That may or may not be, a bad actor. It may be somebody that's, just forgot their password, but you might want to check that out pretty quick. You, again, might see somebody that's authenticating outside of their home geolocation, but they're just traveling outside of their location. So you might not want to automatically suspend, but you want to validate and then be able to push a button and automatically have that occur. So again, there's a lot of different environments that you need to look at your use cases, enhance your use cases, use the existing data and telemetry that you have, and then figure out, what's the best orchestration path. So looking at a quick case study, one of the things we also want to emphasize is speed, and that speed wins when it comes to an attacker and a defender. So a case study is, we've seen this happen in several instances, with some of our clients that we're doing threat detection for is we'll see an indicator of compromise. Some type of logon is detected in multiple locations, possible travel scenario, potentially. We notify the security team. They try to then contact the user, which is hard to do sometimes. They may create a ticket that says, hey, let's request suspending the user account. They have to wait for a change management window. A ticket gets created to then suspend the user account. All of this review, analysis, ticket creation, change management window, then waiting for a change management window simply takes too long. If an attacker has a authenticated unauthorized access as a high value executive in your organization, they can make things happen. Even if it's somebody that's mid-level director someplace or has an admin account, a lot of bad things can happen in a very short period of time, and it increases your risk. As an example, just in one account that we saw, one of our customers we saw over the last 30 days, this is the number of use cases that triggered for potential identity compromise. Things like, hey, authentication preceded by multiple MFA attempts. We've seen that. We've seen where the cloud access security broker user activity was detected that showed impossible travel. We've seen that, logon attempts after brute force, and then horizontal sweeps after a logon attempt. So these are all some of those use cases that we talked about where single instance you should block, tying some of these together, you should potentially block. But we're seeing that there's just an increase in a lot of activity and a lot of our customers that's been increased over the last year. So we would recommend that you start to look at some of these use cases as well and start to look for solutions. If you're looking for solutions and you're one of our clients, we just recently announced a couple months ago a solution called Identity Threat Detection and Response. PROFICIO'S solution is called PROSOC, which is our managed detection and response solution. What we'll do now is just go over a few slides as to what our solution utilizes, how we've been able to create this identity threat detection and response solution. And I'll give you an example of what you might be able to do as well with some of your systems and platforms, or contact us and we'll walk you through and help you to do that with your environment or using our environment and our solution. So just some naming conventions so I don't throw people off. So PROSOC MDR is PROFICIO'S managed detection and response solution, including our global security operations center as a service model, humans evaluating the data, making decisions, giving you alerts. The platform that we utilize is our PROSOC MDR platform, which is a cloud native log management and SIM platform, also utilizing machine learning models with an extensive library of use cases, as well as threat intelligence. It includes a case management system and the ability to automate response, and then go back in and look at portals and dashboards for search and security, event management and security management for business intelligence of your cybersecurity. We also have an open XDR platform that combines with our PROSOC MDR platform, which we call Active Defense. We've had Active Defense for about 8 years now. Active Defense gives you the ability to detect a threat and automatically respond with containment actions, either at the perimeter of the network or at the endpoint by isolating the endpoint, or by now actually suspending a user account. Again, doesn't require any new agents or sensors. We utilize the infrastructure that you have in place and just augment that. So our solution for identity threat detection and response includes the ability to detect identity threats and unauthorized access, and then perform an automated or semi-automated response at the identity and access management system. We can automatically suspend a user account. We can automatically require a password reset or automatically require another multi-factor authentication turn on to force that as well. We can also enable that through a push button response. So when we send you an alert, you go into the case management system, there's a window that says push the button, you push the button, and the process automatically occurs. We've also added a lot of use cases to this environment for user-based models as well as machine learning models. We're utilizing with our solution our existing ProSoc MDR platform and our active defense platform. Another thing that we do with our ProSoc MDR platform is we have a bring your own SIM model where we take all of our intellectual property and we stack it on something like your Splunk environment so that we can perform the same SOC services, active defense, and all the dashboards and everything that we provide. We don't require any new agents, no new sensors. We also work with third-party threat detection solutions. What you're seeing in the marketplace is there's a lot of really good threat detection solutions that are coming out that will use things like endpoint telemetry or tying into your identity and access management system. We should look at those and integrate those so that we can do this double validation automated response with SIM solutions and machine learning models. CrowdStrike just announced one back in Q1. I believe SentinelOne also announced, a solution for identity threat detection. We can combine that with our solution to provide the automated response. Our model is a simple user-based pricing model, and it's an extension of our current managed detection response solution set. To look at, just an architecture for our model, which could be similar to a model that you employ if you're utilizing a SIM or a Splunk solution set, would be you start off with, let me go back. You start off with the ability to collect a broad set of data from your current security solutions. Those security solutions should be from the perimeter. They should be from your endpoint telemetry. They should be from your identity and access management system, whether that's Okta, Azure, Active Directory, or something else. So you want to collect a lot of data. You want to then bring that into your security information event management system, apply use cases, apply behavior-based use case models, add machine learning models in it, correlate that to your threat intelligence, have your humans and your SOC analysts investigate those suspicious indicators, provide an actionable alert system that then brings you back into a case management system, and then give you the ability to either automatically communicate back into the identity and access management system to effectively create an active defense response, or enable through your case management system the ability to push the button again. So a case study in this environment showing you how an identity threat can actually occur. Let's say that I'm a bad actor and I have the ability to gather your username and password that I've mined from that 400 million username passwords that I've collected someplace. So I know your email, I know your username, and I'm logging in from someplace out of the United States, pretending to be your CFO, and I'm an authenticated, unauthorized user, authenticating through Office 365. The logs for that particular authentication will go into your SIM environment, in this case, our ProSoc MDR. We'll have a use case that'll say, I'm looking at a successful logon from Microsoft 365 from a bad actor that logged in from Los Angeles and also someplace outside of the United States within an hour, which would be an impossible travel scenario. So I've detected that this is a compromise. The next thing that in our environment we would do is we would send a notification to Azure Active Directory that says, suspend this user. The detection and the response action takes less than 5 minutes, so that it's an automated detection, automated response with high fidelity of an unauthorized authenticated user in your account. This is how our environment works for an automated case study. For a semi-automated case study, we enable the ability for a client to receive an alert, go into the case management system to review, do some type of an analysis with your security team, and then push the button to initiate a block at your identity and access management system. So we have a button that says activate active defense for identity management block. push it, and within a minute, it automatically suspends the user account. We also have the ability to reverse that if needed as well. As we mentioned before, it's great to have a solution that automates or orchestrates that response action with high fidelity of the threat detection, but you're also going to need reports and other types of remediation action. So reports that we've enabled within our system look at authentication from Active Directory. They look at authentication from AWS and Google and Azure. They're looking at administrative changes and policy changes and threat intelligence. All of these can be indicators. Most organizations don't put an ability to automatically block an account after 5 logons if it's an admin or some other type of an account. So you need to have other types of review of those types of scenarios. You need multiple types of response actions that you automate, not just suspend a user, but maybe block access of a bad actor at a firewall, maybe reset a password. You may also want to quarantine an endpoint from a network, from an account that's been compromised and possibly a device that's been compromised. So these are critical things to consider when you're looking at a solution or when you're implementing your own solution. Again, things like looking at Windows authentication reports, high level of authenticated service accounts, might mean that, you have a cached password someplace, but it might also mean you have a brute force attack in place. So these are the things you need to review in addition to the automation. So again, these are the recommendations we have, from our experience and the experience of a lot of our security partners. At this point, I'd like to open it up to questions. So Kim, if you can come back online, see if we have any questions. We'll answer some questions and do some Q&A.
Yep. Thanks, Brad, for doing that. And thank you guys. Go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A box. I already see a couple popping in. First question, how does ITDR help protect against or prevent ransomware?
Good question. So I think what I mentioned, earlier, and I'll expand on this a little bit, is that ransomware attacks have changed over the last couple of years. It used to be that it was a spray type of an environment where I'm just sending out, hundreds of thousands of emails with a link, for a phishing attack, and anybody that clicks on it, I automatically will encrypt, their network and anything they're attached to, or encrypt their data and anything that, that file system's attached to. Attackers have begun to get more targeted in this environment. So they're sending out phishing attacks, and they're, having you click on a link, and then they're trying to compromise an account, compromise a device. And then once they have that point of presence, they're trying to propagate in your network. They're looking for where your backups are and see how they can disrupt that backup or target that backup, so you're not going to be able to back up. They also look at, the zones within your network, and not just, a single zone, but expanding it across multiple zones. So they're staging the attack to make it more effective, if you will. So what we're seeing is that instead of just random phishing attacks, that attackers are now saying, hey, if I can get an identity of somebody and I can compromise that identity, then it's easier for me to go in the background and target a single user and then expand from that single user by compromising the account, compromising the device, and then, carrying on from there. So I don't even have to use, a phishing attack anymore. So that's what we're seeing, that, companies are getting compromised identities, leading to, these ransomware attacks. So thank you for that question. Hopefully that was helpful. Next question.
Great. I got one more. How does the onboarding process work? How long does it take to implement PROFICIO'S ITDR solution?
Another good question. So many organizations might already have, some type of a security information management system. They're collecting data, and they already have, they may not know it, but you probably already have some user identity-based use cases. What we would recommend is, if you have a SIM, to expand your user identity detection, and then, if you have a SOAR platform, security orchestration and automated response, look to utilize that to integrate with your identity and access management system, and then create a workflow for how you would actually automate that or automate that capability. If you don't have those, you don't want to, go through that process. PROFICIO has a solution we call PROSOC MDR, which is our managed detection and response system, where we have, all the tools, if you will, natively in the cloud. We will collect all your log data. We will apply all of our use cases, and then we will create our automation into your identity and access management system. It takes about, it could take as quick as a week, to put in place. Most often it takes about 4 weeks to put our solution in place, tune it, get high fidelity of the use cases, because we got to collect the data, look at the data, do some baselining, make sure that we have high fidelity, and then implement, the solution. Once our solution is implemented, anywhere from that, 1 to 4, 5 week time frame, we turn it on, we make sure that everything's working properly, in your environment, before you automatically are suspending users or blocking IP addresses. And then it takes just a day to, implement it, and boom, we're done. So it's very, very quick implementation. All the process and all the integration is already done. Doesn't require any new sensors, doesn't require any new agents. So it's really, not a lot of work on the side of on the client.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Any other questions? I think we got most of them. If not, then I'll let you wrap it up.
Great, excellent. Well, again, thank you everyone for attending this webinar on identity threat detection and response. Hopefully it's been informational for you. We do these on a regular basis. We welcome you to come back for more information on what we're seeing in the cybersecurity market. And if you'd like to learn more about our solution set or get a demo, or just understand how we did it, so you might be able to implement it in your environment, please contact us at info@proficio.com, and we'd love to work with you. Thank you very much, and have a great day.